now introduce our speakers for today, Jonathan Ali, Maria Luna, and Karoline Pelikan. Maria Luna is about to joining us. It's just asked for a couple of minutes more to joining because she's now busy at the International Documentary Film Festival in Bogotá. So she will be here in a matter of minutes, but I will start introducing before Jonathan and Karoline. So Jonathan Ali is here in representation of 1230 Collective, an initiative based in the UK that aims to showcase classic and contemporary films from the Caribbean and its diaspora. And while Karoline Pelikan is a German-Peruvian documentary filmmaker, founder of the production company Pelikan Pictures and of Cine Latino, an initiative that promotes the work of independent Latin American filmmakers in the UK. So I'm also going to read Maria's bio. So Maria is an adjunct professor of creative documentary at Tecnocampus and the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. And she's also artistic director of MIDBO, International Documentary Film Festival in Bogotá, which had just opened yesterday. So as I anticipated, she's very kindly and generously agreed to join us, but obviously she has to squeeze this roundtable in between all the other commitments that she has in the festival. So I'm pretty sure that she will be here in a matter of seconds. But I would like at this point to start our conversation, and I will start to ask Jonathan and Karoline to tell us a little bit about their experiences in bringing Latin American films in the UK, in this case, because both of you are based in the UK. From where and from which did you start? Which type of films you generally screen at the events that you organize? And what type of collaborations, circuits, and audiences you usually aim at? And also if you can maybe hint a little bit of what have been the main challenges in promoting Latin American and Caribbean films here in the UK. So I leave you the floor. Each one of you can pick who wants to go first. And maybe also if you want to add something about yourself that I have forgot to tell about my super short bios, feel free to add. In the meantime, I see that Maria has just joined us. So I will repeat the question after Jonathan and Karoline will start the first round. So in the meantime, welcome, Maria.
Hi, Dalila. I'm sorry, everybody. I just leave from another Zoom, but it's great to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so maybe I just repose the question right now. Thank you for joining us. Just explained that you are very busy at the moment with at MIDBO. So I just introduced you already to our audience, and I just posed the first very general question to you, to our speakers. Just asking to tell us a little bit about your experiences in bringing Latin American films in Europe, telling us a little bit about your practice, what type of films you generally screen, and what type of collaborations, circuits, and audiences you usually aim at, and also what have been the main challenges in promoting Latin American and Caribbean films. So a little bit like introducing yourselves and maybe just telling us more about your practice and your experiences. So whoever wants to go first, feel free.
I'm happy to start, if that's all right. Yeah, maybe I'll just begin with some general comments on the work that 1230 Collective does in terms of the films that we have programmed to date, and then maybe after the others speak, we can then maybe talk a bit more about audiences and challenges and things like that. The 1230 Collective is myself and Lisa Harewood. Lisa, who unfortunately can't be with us today. We started the collective in 2019. I'm originally from Trinidad and Lisa is from Barbados. And we felt, Lisa and I, who had known each other previously before moving to the UK, we'd known each other back in the Caribbean. Lisa is a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker and producer, and I am a professional film programmer. I started my career at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival in Trinidad, and I was there from the inception for the first 10 years of the festival, actually. So we'd known each other, and we'd, gotten to know a lot about the Caribbean film scene and, films that were being made. And when we, came to the UK, we realized that, a lot of these films, in particular, a lot of the films that were, being made now, contemporary Caribbean cinema, wasn't really being, those films weren't really being shown in the UK. And we felt that there was an opportunity to start bringing these films to audiences. So we started the collective. And from the beginning, from the beginning of my career as a programmer with a sort of focus on Caribbean cinema, we always intended our films to be more than just what a lot of people might assume to be, what Caribbean cinema, would be, or the films that we would show would be, which would be strictly from the English-speaking Caribbean. Because there's this general perception here in the UK, I suppose, that when you say Caribbean, that's what you mean. You mean the former British colonies, because we're in Britain. So the Caribbean has a very specific meaning to a lot of people here, which is, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, But of course, the Caribbean is also, the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, the Hispanophone Caribbean. So that's Cuba, that's the DR, that's Puerto Rico, but also the French islands, Martinique and Guadeloupe, there's Haiti, there's the Dutch Caribbean. So we always knew, and we always intended, that we would screen films from, the entire Caribbean region, not just the English-speaking Caribbean. So we weren't looking only to target, British Caribbean audiences. We were looking to, first and foremost, target audiences who wanted to see good Caribbean films, and so that could be any kind of audience, really. And funny enough, our first public screening event in 2019 at the Brookes Institute for the Moving Image, it was a program of two not contemporary films, actually, because we also wanted to show classic Caribbean films that perhaps had gone unseen, and kind of rehabilitate their reputation. And so we started with a program of 16mm. We screened on 16mm some 1970s Marxist documentaries from Guyana, but they were made by a collective called the Victor Jara Collective. And if you know Chile, Victor Jara was a great activist and folk singer. But this collective, who were based in Guyana and had a mixture of Guyanese and North American members, they were very much influenced. They were Marxist, and they were very much influenced by new Latin American cinema, by third cinema, and so Guyana, of course, is a Caribbean country, but it's in South America. So all these things, kind of combined, and out of solidarity with the third cinema of Latin America and the leftist movements in other countries, they named their collective the Victor Jara Collective. So I thought it was interesting that we started with that, and so we were kind of positioning ourselves in a certain way that way. And then then after that, the pandemic happened and we had to shift to screening films online. And the first film we screened was a comedy because we wanted to do something light, to kind of switch things up a little bit. And our first film was actually a Colombian film. It wasn't a Caribbean film, but it was a film directed by Samir Oliveros called Bad Lucky Goat. And the film is actually set on a Caribbean island, Providencia, which has a Caribbean Creole population. They speak a Creole English. And the film is very much influenced by the classic reggae films from Jamaica from the 1970s. And we had a Q&A with Samir Oliveros, and we, he talked about being influenced by those Jamaican films, but also, of course, being Colombian, bringing those two things together. So yeah, as I say, from the beginning, we were very much, the collective was very much, focused on showcasing, cinema of the Caribbean as a region that goes beyond just, the places we come from as, part of the English-speaking Caribbean. And, that's how we've continued. And the film that we've programmed for Cine Mobility, Miriam Yente, is from the Dominican Republic, very much a Caribbean place, but also Latin America.
Shall I continue?
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and I agree so many things with you, Jonathan. We already talked about. Well, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see a few familiar faces, and I think a few former participants as well from our events. So probably the things I'm telling you about are not too new to you. So with Cine Latino, and thank you very much for the introduction, Dalila, because I think you mentioned my background as documentary filmmaker, which already tells a lot about my passion for films, especially for films from the region. So I'm Peruvian. And I mean, I'm an independent filmmaker, I'm a documentary filmmaker, I'm a woman, and I mainly do short films, and none of this screams big festivals. Most of these films are, I mean, not only because I'm like an underrepresented filmmaker, but also my genre of films, short films and documentary nonfiction that portrays often experimental or intimate type of portraits, usually don't get, even though they're very beautifully made, they don't get a wider audience. And these are exactly the films that we kind of aim to bring to a wider audience. And this all started when I moved to London by the end of 2017, early 2018. I was really excited because I always thought, ooh, London is so multicultural, and I get to see a lot of Latin American film screenings, and I get to meet a lot of Latin American colleagues, and somehow that didn't happen. So it seemed to me when I came to London, there were very, very specific niche audiences and niche Latin American film screenings, which usually were the ones that focus on the big industries in Latin America. So there was a Brazil festival, there was a festival focused on Argentina and Mexico. And I kind of thought, well, where's Peru? Where's Colombia? Where's Bolivia? Where are the other countries? And that's how it all started. So long before we established a name, Cine Latino, I mean, which kind of combines and explains what we do. We started with a selection, with a screening in partnership with King's College London, and a selection of short films, of nonfiction short films made by 6 Peruvian filmmakers. And we always try to look at the gender parity, to have films made by women, to have films maybe by 1 or 2 indigenous filmmakers, films that usually don't get screened. And we were very, very surprised by the really success of this little event that we didn't promote really. We didn't know how to promote it at that point, actually. So we were very surprised, and we did have a conversation afterwards with the audience, and it seemed to me that the audience was kind of longing for these type of events. So they had seen niche festivals before, but they wanted more. So Latin America, and they especially wanted a sort of view on Latin America that is not the typical exotic view of, oh, this is Latin America, but rather interesting stories of how, let's say, for example, indigenous filmmakers see themselves, or how women filmmakers portray themes of womanhood in their films, and not always the typical presentation. So we started to look for films, that don't get the attention, let's say, from a UK audience. We had a lot of, which surprised me as well, how easy it was to get Latin American films as UK premieres. It surprised me because I thought those really, really amazing films that got or received international acclaim in other countries have never been screened in the UK, and they were part of UK research, usually in scholarly environments. They got talked about, but they were never screened. So yeah, we started to do that. So I would say the kind of audience that we managed on the one side were maybe academics or in the academic environment, but at the same time we thought, oh, it's important, or for us it was important, to bring in the Latin American audience, to bring in Latinas who live in the UK. And for me, it is one of the most exciting and beautiful moments when audience members who are Latinas come to our screenings and to community screenings. So we had to partner with a lot of community organizations who work with Latin Americans who live, well, in that moment it was in London, and who came up after the screening and said, oh, this is my village you're screening, or this is my city, I don't know, that suddenly was portrayed in a film. And I think, so this is the type of two audiences that we kind of bring together and want to bring together. And yeah, so it's this kind of mixture of screenings in academic environments, screenings in artistic independent cinemas, but also community screenings in, I don't know, setting up a beamer, getting a projector, and just bring in as many people as possible to show films from across Latin America, and usually from countries that are not often portrayed in bigger festivals, let's say.
Thank you, Carolina. Maria, you want to?
Yes, well, for me, I will start like introducing myself and how I arrived to the ideas of circulating Latin American cinema, that in fact in the beginning was only Colombian cinema of the armed conflict, because my dissertation that I started in 2008 and finished in 2014 is called Mapping Heterotopias, Colombian Documentaries of the Armed Conflict. And at those times I mapped 120 documentaries about the armed conflict in Colombia in the rural zone. What I realized there was that the documentaries were not necessarily portrayed, or many of them, in Colombia, but in Europe. So they were more connected with the sensibility of France or Spain, even in this portrait of the victims of the armed conflict, than with the country itself that was still neglecting this conflict. So when I mapped that, I realized that there was like a connection between this exhibition, this legitimation exhibition, and the need of these documentaries to come back to the country in a more legitimate way, let's say that. That is the case, for example, of a filmmaker that you maybe know well, that is Nicolas Rincón Guillet, who actually has a film that is called Tantas Almas, so many souls, I think that will be the translation. He started, in fact, with, I think, Belgian funds, and started to exhibit in Cinema de Réel. And that's called my attention because we didn't have contact with his filmography in 2007, I think, the first film, but Europe had this contact. So after my dissertation, I contact with an organization, a Cine Club in Paris, that provides some of the films that I analyze. And this is El Perro que Ladra, the reason why you invite me here, Dalila. El Perro que Ladra, Le Chien qui Aboie in Paris, was first a Cine Club, and then become an exhibition with El Panorama de Cine Colombiano, a Colombian, how can I translate that? Can you help me with the translation? Colombian showcase of showcase of Colombian cinema. So I was living in Barcelona, and we got together in this organization and started to organize the Panorama de Cine Colombiano in 2012. And we were just maybe academics that need to have access to these films, or maybe people that work in exhibition because they just love cinema, or they wanted to open the film production. Was very independent, really, what happens there. We didn't have fund in the beginning, so it was self-organized. And then we started to connect this need of some of the Colombian students, maybe Latin American students and researchers in Paris and Barcelona, to exhibit this film, just to fill a need that we didn't have access to this film anywhere. So we decided to, for example, as you say, Caroline, to screen indigenous cinema. That was very popular at the moment among the researchers and other people in Barcelona. And for example, we screened Naboba and Ushui, that are films made by the indigenous people at Sierra Nevada, Santa Marta. They were very well received, let's say, by this audience. And it was the first time that these Colombian films were circulating in other space in Europe, I think. And it helped them afterwards to circulate in festivals like Alucine, for example, in Toronto. And it was like a network that was built from bottom up, let's say, more or less. So we open from the academic space in my case, and in the case of my colleagues from the production of cinema and distribution of cinema. And also we screen films like The Embrace of the Serpent in public open space in the city in Barcelona, as they did in Paris in this model. We stopped the project in Barcelona. We started in 2012 and end in 2015, because, as I said, it was a self-made project, and we started to work as teachers in the university. So we didn't have more time to pursue this cinema exhibition. But in Paris, they continue the project. The group still exists, and next year they will arrive to 10 years of exhibiting Latin American cinema. And I think that it's very interesting how the diaspora of film students is connected through cinema, and is opening new space for the exhibition that are becoming more, let's say, maybe it's institutionalized, because, for example, El Perro que Ladra in Paris receives some funds sometimes if they apply to national funds to exhibit Latin American films in Europe. And then I moved to this festival that Dalila just mentioned, that is MIDBO, that is the International Documentary Film Festival in Bogotá. I have always been connected with them somehow, because I have been working in the academic component of this festival 5 years ago, and then we connect filmmakers from US, Europe, Colombia that speak in Colombia as well in the festival. So the work of circulation has been very from the beginning, from the academia, let's say, with the thesis, afterwards with more or less with a self-made festival in El Perro que Ladra, and now, let's say, more professional with MIDBO, that we move from the academia to the idea of organizing the festival in connection with also with my work in Barcelona, let's say, connecting researchers, connecting people that exhibit cinema, and doing this organization of a festival that is not only documentary exhibition, but also to think and to reflect on documentary, and to produce books that are also circulated, or helping to the circulation of cinema between Latin America, Europe, and even US. I could say that for the moment, and we could open the discussion to others' questions if you want.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much to the three of you. I think it's very interesting to see that there's a sort of common thread also in your practice, in the way that it builds with these networks that also kind of like intersect as well with academia, with different actors, and also this need to fill a void in a way. So it's something that is missing in the in what is screened usually in the cities you are based, so London, Barcelona, but also in the case of the practice of Maria Luna in Paris. And I would like just to take inspiration from one of the questions from the chat box from Maya. That was actually one of the questions that I was planning as well to pose about obviously what has happened recently with the pandemic. Jonathan already mentioned that you have to move online, and this obviously posed some challenges, but also possibly opportunities. And I think that this also has affected all of you in some way. So I would like to ask you, taking again inspiration from the question of Maya in the chat, to talk about a little bit of what was the impact, what has been the impact of the pandemic on your specific practice, but also maybe to open up a little bit to making some considerations of what you think might be the opportunities or challenges for the future. So that's something that you will keep from this experience and you will kind of treasure from the future, and what you think is the outlook as well after what has just recently happened. Then I would say that after this question, I will open the floor to the rest of the public. So prepare your questions while we go with this round.
Yeah, maybe I'll go back to the point about, as you say, there's a common thread here in terms of, exhibiting work through academic spaces, because yeah, 12th Collective sort of started it's a public exhibition through the Brookes Institute for the Moving Image, which is where I did my postgraduate work. So I already had a relationship with BIMI, and I had independently curated some work there, including a documentary from Puerto Rico, actually. Yeah, so from the beginning, we were lucky to have some relationships that we formed that really helped us in terms of getting the word out about our events and audiences, getting audiences. Birkbeck's Center for, I always get the name wrong, CLAVS, I think it's called, the Center for Latin American Visual Studies or something like that at Birkbeck. And we also, have a very good relationship with UCL's School of the Americas, and they were very good. They have been good partners with us in terms of promoting events. We partnered on an online event with them last year. Actually, they were like official co-partners on an event that we did. So yeah, so that's definitely something that yeah, is a feature of what we do, is having that academic link. And in terms of shifting the practice, our exhibition work online. Yeah, again, we're about to do our final event for the year, which will be with BIMI again, and it will be online because they're not going back to physical screenings until 2022. So yeah, there have been opportunities, to connect with audiences that you might not otherwise really get to connect with, doing online screenings, and having connections with, and being able to, for example, have guests for conversations and Q&As, who might not be where you are, so that's useful. But we've also started going back to physical events. We're currently acting as distributors for the tour, the theatrical tour of a classic Jamaican film, No Place Like Home, which is the long lost follow-up film to The Harder They Come, the classic Jamaican reggae film by Barry Hensel. And that is a strictly in cinema theatrical tour, and we're taking the film around the country, screening at independent cinemas for that. But yeah, we'll continue to do virtual screenings and mix it up with in-person screenings. I mean, those are really I think primal more than, the most important thing is really the community, that comes with in-person screenings, more than the film itself. It's the event. But yeah, I mean, the opportunities that, we've had through doing virtual events, I think, we'd be happy to continue to capitalize on those, because they outweigh, the downsides, and there are downsides to the virtual world, and virtual fatigue is one of them, among others. But yeah, we'll continue to, and why wouldn't we? I mean, yeah. So
the need to discuss films, especially beautiful films. I think that was one of the really nice things that we could do pre-pandemic, we always try to have a sort of additional event going with the screening, either panel talk or talk with the director if it was possible to dial them in, or even bring them in if they lived in Europe. But usually it was more dialing them in from another country, but having a panel conversation, or just having a conversation, just being there and just talking afterwards to the audience. And that, of course, I really felt it was a weird time. It was a weird time for everyone when the pandemic hit us, because I was feeling that we were just about to start really having the right partnerships, having found the right cinemas. I mean, we started in 2018, as I mentioned, so we didn't have a name. So that all came in 2018, 19-ish, and then the pandemic hit. So we just had our first, and we're a longtime partner and will continue to be, because I'm part of the other team as well, FLAVA, the Festival of Latin American Women in Arts, where Cine Latino curates the cinema program. So we had just had the first edition, and yeah, everything came together, and we suddenly all had to move everything to the virtual world. However, I think we did see an opportunity there, because everything pre-pandemic was in London, meaning every event, also the organizations, the collectives, the other collectives, the art collectives that we're working with. I mean, I know a lot is based in London, but not everything, but we were only doing things in London. And so I kind of thought, oh, this is really a great opportunity to move things virtually across the UK. You usually get licenses when you buy them for a country or for a region. So we suddenly had the possibility to screen across the UK and get Cine Latino as a name out there. And we had people, or we tried to contact with organizations in other bigger cities across the UK, or other festivals, and try to connect with them and trying to help sharing with promotion. We share yours, you share ours. So there was a lot of sudden possibilities that open up that we hope to continue to do after, well, or once we can go back, let's say, to in-person screenings, that we now suddenly have partners and partnerships with either other festivals or know people in other cities that are very interested in our work and want to bring Latin American films to their city, to their community. I'm currently based in Norwich, for example, had to move out of London, living in Norwich, and would love to bring more Latin American films to this region as well. So I think there are opportunities that we consider. And I'm going through your questions, Maya, in terms of, do you keep track of who attends? We only do that around, I mean, most of our promotion is on social media. That's our main kind of promotion, well, where we get it out. I'm terrified a little bit of GDPR. I'm really, really scared of that in terms of keeping and storing database and contacts. I'm pretty sure that most people won't be or want to actually know and want to be part of a newsletter. So we're currently thinking about that, because we're also thinking about how to, I don't know, get information as a sort of website, for example, out to people. And there we might be able to organize something in a database, and to kind of have a more, or let's say a better log of who attends. We don't have that now, to be fair. And yeah, I think the pros and cons, I mean, there are pros and cons with virtual screenings. I think Jonathan mentioned them nicely. The con, I mean, the biggest cons is really you're missing this interaction with the audience, and there's a lot that goes missing in the virtual world. I mean, it's really nice that we can all connect from our computers and we can talk about films, but yeah, in the end, what I missed most was to go to a cinema and see a film in a cinema, because most films are intended to be seen on a screen and to be seen in the atmosphere of a cinema, and you can't have that on your computer at home.
Maria?
I just want to come back to the origins of El Perro que Ladra for us. For example, in Barcelona, we started with Bogotá, which was a festival, a Colombian festival that wanted to have a showcase online. And we decided to participate and to upload some documentaries of different people that wanted to share their films with us from Barcelona to Bogotá. So it was a long round, but it was very interesting because at this moment, I think it generates a community. And I think that's the possibility with online, that you generate a community from far away, people that can feel really connected through cinema, through the exhibition, but also through the participation of their own films. But that was really the origin for in Barcelona to participate, because I think Paris at the moment couldn't do it, and we did it from Barcelona. What I want to clarify is that I have been working in network with Paris, but I don't work in Paris with El Perro que Ladra. So the coordinator of El Perro que Ladra in Paris is Viva Tauribe at the moment. I think she's doing an excellent work exhibiting Latin American cinema in different spaces of the city. As I said, our project with El Perro que Ladra stopped in Barcelona in 2015, even though we're still connected and sharing films and doing some activities, but not the Panorama de Cine Colombiano that they still have in Barcelona. But I wanted to mention this first Bogotá experience with El Perro que Ladra, because it was an online experience with no limitations. I think no limitations, no geo-blog. No one mentioned that. They just share the documentaries with us and feel very happy to have them online for everybody on the web. Full-length films, short films, 1-minute films. It was really excellent and like very spontaneous. But now the panorama is very different. In fact, it's very different because we now have to address all these professional things that have emerged with the popularity of the circulation, but also with the possibility that this becomes part of an industry, the fee that we have to pay, or the possibility that we cannot exhibit the films. For example, at MIDBO, now we program an hybrid film festival, which was very difficult. I will never do that again, because it's like doing 2 festivals at the same time. That's the landscape that we have now. 2 festivals at the same time, because we didn't know what was the reality in Colombia for the moment, and we didn't know if we have a presential screening, physical screening. We didn't know if it was going to happen. Finally, it's happening. We're now coming back to the cinemas, and I am value more now the ritual of going to cinema and sharing a film than the access that I value before, because I think that after the pandemic, it has become very special to have the possibility to come back to, as Karoline mentioned, to come back to the physical encounter that cinema is. Because probably, as Jonathan said, we have virtual fatigue. That's one thing, but also because we realize that we could have access, but we don't have the ritual. So for me, after the pandemic, it has changed the priority. But I just want to mention in relationship to the question of Maya, this issue of the geo-blog, because I think that now has become worse. Now that we have the possibility to have all the films offline or online, the companies have also realized the threat that come with that, because they also need to be part of the physical festivals. And if they offer online the film, they just block the possibility of circulating in another spheres. So that has been for me very interesting relationship with the possibility of circulation and access, and the need of coming back to the ritual, just to summarize.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because there has been possibly this shift of being, as you said, obsessed with the idea of access to content, and then we realize that maybe we are already overwhelmed by content, and actually is the possibility to pick and have a different experience that is obviously, as your experience of curators and film programmers, it's precisely at that mediation between having these extraordinary opportunities for access and obviously a limited time as well. So it's making the occasion and the experience unique in a way, no? So it's the experience of curation as well that makes the difference. We had other questions from the chat. Again, if someone wants to start to interact and pose other questions with their voice and switching on their camera, but in the meantime, I will pick up from the chat as well. There's again Maya was asking something actually really interesting about the impact that is already, it is a bit in line with what we were discussing now, the fact that now there's way more access to different platforms, online platforms that supposedly will provide us more access also to films from the Latin American region, from the Caribbean. Obviously, there's the option, but do you think that these developments, obviously this opportunity to access streaming platforms, so the big names, let's say Netflix, Amazon, but also Mubi, maybe we can also mention that, do you think that gave more exposure to the type of films that you usually programmed, is kind of made an impact, or do you think that actually this is not changed or hasn't changed the way Latin American films are perceived and accessed by the audience? Maya says, is that a way of cannibalizing audiences for Latin American cinema and taking the focus away from independent work?
I think I can speak to this because it's an experience I've had not only with the 12-Day Collective, but programming, film festivals and so on. But I mean, I just want to come back briefly to the point of access through virtual, the virtual realm, and there was such a great, upwelling last year, of films, online, and particularly around the middle of the year last year with the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of archives and streaming services, various different exhibition companies and so on, in a rush to show their supposed solidarity and burnish their bona fides as woke. They opened up the floodgates and out came all this wonderful material, a lot of great hard to see archival work, and it was great to engage with a lot of that work, and then shoop, the gates closed, and now we're kind of back in the same problem where we have as curators wanting to get a lot of particularly archival material, archival films. It's a challenge, but what happened last year shows that the work is there, and if the rights holders want to, they can make it accessible. But there are good things too, like for example, the Havana Glasgow Film Festival last year, they had to go online, right, because of the pandemic, and they had a program of an archival program dedicated to the work of the late Afro-Cuban documentary filmmaker Nicolas Guillen Landrian. And I had never heard of his work before, and I saw his work as a part of this. I was actually not in the UK at the time; I was in Italy at the end of the year, and I was accessing the festival from there, and I saw his work for the first time, and it was absolutely blown away. And I was just like, "Oh my God, how is it? I've never heard of this man before." And what a fascinating story of his! If you've not, heard of him, look him up. And it was just wonderful. And then, I got in touch with the people behind the festival and started talking to them, and a lot of things came out of that. So there's good things that are coming out of that have come out of the online experience. But then, as I say, there's also the downside to it. when it comes to, you know, the question of the streaming services and Latin American cinema and Caribbean cinema, I mean, there's good and bad. So right now, as I said, you know, 1230 Collective is doing, you know, a theatrical tour of Perry Hensel's No Place Like Home, and we actually have, you know, there's a partnership that we have through Cinema Rediscovered in Bristol with Mubi, and they're currently screening his first film, The Harder They Come, which has been great. It's been, you know, putting a spotlight not only on that film, but on, you know, our tour of No Place Like Home. So that's nice. And, you know, there is great stuff that, you know, and I would single out Mubi. They've really started doing the work of, you know, kind of going beyond the sort of big titles, you know, the big Latin American titles, you know, Roma and all these, you know, sorts of films, to kind of focus on smaller films and smaller, you know, filmmakers. I think they had a program recently. I think of the Colombian filmmaker Laura Huertas Milian, you know, and so they're doing work like that, which is great. And I don't know if it's cannibalizing. I mean, but what also happens is that, you know, they can take a film off the table. So, for example, I'll kind of do some inside baseball here, just for you guys. There was a Mexican film that was a film that had a Caribbean connection because it was shot partly in Belize, and it had a Belizean lead character, and the story was a Mexican Belizean story called Selva Tragica, that premiered at Venice, I think 2 years ago, and was quite well received. And the festival in Miami that I programmed, Third Horizon Film Festival, we were very keen to have the film. You know, there's so little Belizean cinematic representation. We thought it was a great film to have. And I got in touch with the producers, and they said, okay, maybe, but there's a streamer that's involved, that's interested in the film, so we'll have to let you know if, you know, we can show it. And then turns out that Mubi took the film, and once Mubi got the rights for the film, then it couldn't screen at any more festivals after that, even though we wanted to screen it before it was actually going to be released, you know? And so the film never even had like a theatrical premiere, you know, audiences in Belize couldn't see it, you know, for example. I mean, of all places, you know, it would have been like the first real sort of Belizean sort of story, you know, in cinema. And that didn't happen, and that was a crime, if you ask me, you know. And of course, when they take films like this, and they you know, and I don't want to single out just Mubi, because I've said good things about them too. So you know, but then, you know, they can bury it on the platform, and you don't even know that they've acquired it because they don't do the work to promote certain kinds of films. So yeah, so there's good and bad with the platforms, I'll say. I'll make just one more point before I hand over to others, because it's something that Karoline mentioned, and I have to say that you know, we've seen some interesting things happening in the exhibition of Latin American Caribbean cinema in the UK recently in general. Right now, for example, there's the Brazilian Indigenous Film Festival happening at the ICA, and apparently that's been going over really well, and they've added new screenings there. And that, I think, also is connected to has some connection, at least, with what happened the last 2 years at Sheffield Doc Fest with you know, the festival director Cynthia Gil, who's from Portugal, but she has a, you know, a strong Brazilian connection, and she brought in a lot of great Caribbean and Latin American content. I came on board as a Caribbean program advisor for this year and brought some, you know, films from Venezuela and from the Caribbean to the program. Of course, we all know what happened at Sheffield. Cynthia was booted out, and now they're rejigging the whole festival, you know. So this, you know, push for diversity, you know, sometimes it goes too far and they have to pull it back, and so the fight continues, the struggle continues. But there are you know, good things are happening, you know, what Karoline is doing as well, you know. So you know, we fight on.
Okay, Maria says that it seems to me that a plan for La Retina Latina could have a lot of potential, but is limited by geographic and very uneven creation. I wonder. Yeah, definitely. O sea, Retina Latina will be the ideal space to circulate Latin American cinema, at least among the region. But I think that they also confront, as a let's say, mixed organization. I think they're private, but they receive public funding. I'm not sure that this came up, but Retina Latina, I think that also confronts these ideas of geoblog, of limited visualizations. Of, for example, you find a film like La Sirga for a very limited amount of time, and then disappear of the catalog of Retina Latina again. And this is, La Sirga was one of the film premiere in Cannes, for example, in Colombia, that is very meaningful for researchers, for students. That could be, it would be ideal if it could be a long access to this kind of film, a long-term access, sorry. But this is usually not possible in a legal way of doing it. Maya just mentioned that they probably pirate a film, for example, and I think that pirate is, I'm going to say, very politically incorrect in terms of industry, but I think pirate is the measure of success of a film. When everybody is really interested in having this film, for example, I think The Embrace of the Serpent should be circulating everywhere. And it's like the people is taking the distribution by their own hands. That's really piracy. And I think they also are pointing out to a fail in the system, let's say, why we couldn't have these films open in platforms when the commercial circuit has expired. Why not? And I know Retina Latina will be a very good space for having that, but this is still not able to do it because of the legal issues. Retina Latina cannot decide to put a film that do not own the rights, for example. But I was also thinking about the first question of Maya, about this idea of if they're cannibalizing somehow independent cinema or independent productions. And I think we're moving between our conception of what is good cinema, the cinema that should circulate as curators and also as academics, and what the people want really to watch. For example, when I was traveling to Colombia this month, I was having a conversation with a taxi driver, and he was very happy in Barcelona, telling me all the films that he loved or the series that he loved from Colombia. And of course, were all that Netflix offered. And I was very surprised, and I said, okay, but his sensibility is very different to mine. I will say, no, this is not the right production that should circulate. But probably if the taxi driver has access to this independent cinema, probably he didn't even watch them. You know what I mean? That we have this gap between the popular and with what we really think as curators that should be watched from our countries. But I think that we have to put a big question about that. What is the different kind of access? What we really understand by mainstream content, for example, what is local content when we have this global platform, what they are really defining that local content, because they are defining local content for massive audience, and they are connected with the sensibility somehow. Not with our sensibility, of course. Maybe we need a popular, an independent platform that allows us that global circulation that we still needed from the academia, researchers, and maybe we can build it. But people, let's say general sensibility, have their content that they really like to see. For example, from Colombia in the global context, I think they have it.
Yeah, I would just like to jump in before leaving the floor to Karoline if she wanted to reply to this question about the streaming services, because I think it's very interesting what Maria is saying about the sensibility of the curator and how this impact obviously in the selection of films that you eventually decide to bring to the UK, to the European audiences, and also was mentioning Karoline before about the fact that you actually have audience of diaspora, let's say, of the migrant community, Latin American migrant community in London that joins to see these screenings as well. So possibly it's maybe more. I was wondering also how do you select your films? What kind of circuits might be more festival entries, film festivals? What kind of your curation? What kind of paths follows? And what kind of audience you have in mind, obviously, when you do this kind of selection? Because I think it's very interesting what Maria was saying, because obviously I I'm very interesting to know more about this as well, about your practice, because I heard that obviously you have this academic connection, so this possibly also conditions what your selection it is in a way. But I also imagine that there are other aspects that you take into account while you pick or select a film. So just want to jump in this because I was really inspired by what Maria was saying, but obviously Karoline, you can add whatever you want also about the streaming platform. I think that these are all connected, but I just wanted to learn more about, to hear more about how you pick the films actually, because it's something that really interests me, and I think it's interesting to also maybe for the rest of the audience and for our conversation.
Can I just make one correction before I hand over to Karoline? I wrongfully maligned a movie when I should have maligned Netflix. It was Netflix that acquired Salva Tragica, not movie. So yeah, sorry about that one.
Thanks. Poor movie. I hope he's not listening that we are talking about movies.
Well, they have their own sins as well, so you know.
Boo Netflix, while they create a really funny audience. No, I can't add too much to the streaming discussion, because we don't really, at least I felt that streaming platforms didn't really interfere with our selection of films, because even for the most, let's say, acclaimed films that we've screened, they are not on the platforms. They might, I think, Canción Sin Nombre, and I think they only got Netflix release in the US and Latin America. I think they don't have Netflix release in Europe. And that's a film that went to Cannes. It was Peru's official Oscars selected film. It's a really beautiful film. So yeah, I mean, the films that we select usually don't get picked up, at least not by Netflix. I think Amazon does have the paid version, which is also fine for us, even if they screen it and they have a paid, the paid film, let's say you have to pay for it in the UK. Our screenings are free, so we kind of advertise with that. And then Mubi, yeah, I think Mubi might be the most, the streaming platform where you can find a few films that we've screened. Interestingly, it didn't have so much issues then with the streaming platforms, but kind of had to suddenly see myself during the pandemic compete with cinemas, because cinemas suddenly, and even cinema chains like Curzon, Picture House, I mean, those are more artsy chains, but still they suddenly seem to have a really huge interest in Latin American films. So we suddenly saw 2 films that we wanted to screen in previously then screened in theaters. I mean, I'm saying compete because I'm very happy that they are screening them, and we obviously try to promote their screenings and they help us then later with ours. I don't really see them as competition, but I kind of thought it was interesting that films that we selected, I mean, you'd usually select months before. You don't decide, oh yeah, tomorrow I'm screening that one. So it's months of process of selecting, curating, and then talking to distributors, getting the license rights and everything. And it was interesting that cinemas in the UK suddenly were doing that, apparently, with Latin American films. So that happened, I think, with Los Sonambulos, for example, and Canción Sin Nombre was there. Yeah, I think, and Dockhouse, for example, showed Radio Silence, the Mexican film about the journalist. Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. And coming to your question then, talking a little bit about the curation and selection of films, I think it highly depends on the themes. So I say, or I previously said that our very general audience is, we have these 2 strings of the academic environment, usually I would say British people, but it can be international people, let's say international researchers living in the UK, but working with a focus on Latin American films. And then the other big strand that we try to combine, which is the diaspora, which are Latinas living in the UK. And we try to bring them together. And then I think there comes to this general audience, because it's a very broad audience, there come kind of specifically targeted audiences depending on the theme. So if we have a theme that is focusing on women's rights or human rights, we do work with women and feminist organizations. We're currently planning, for example, a coming of age screening. So yeah, I mean, coming of age, it's really interesting because how we select, it's not only that we think, oh, coming of age, so every film that has or that features a child or adolescent, that's a coming of age film. It's not. You obviously have to think, what themes do they portray? Mediamente, for example, that was screened here, and we did screen it last year as well, has this very, very interesting focus of portraying a teenager, but also talking about her biracial identity and talking about racism, talking about all these underlying other topics that go on, where you can have really amazing conversations with an audience. So not only talking about coming of age, but also connected to another topic. Los Sonambulos, for example, you can talk about intrafamiliar conflicts, violence, microsexism. There are so many other themes going on, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, I mean, there are other films that we're currently thinking about. So you have Retablo Pelo Malo, where you have a gender sexuality theme in. And with all those themes that open up and that I'm mentioning, there comes a more specifically target audience as well that you can then invite and talk about. And this audience not necessarily is interested in Latin American films from the very beginning. They might be later, but they are rather interested in the theme than maybe the region, Latin America. So that combination is really interesting. And I think, yeah, when we curate, I mean, I can talk a lot about curation because it's such a complicated, no, not complicated, but complex process. It comes to, as a storyteller, which I am as a filmmaker, you try to find a story, you try to find a narrative, which films connect, which film tells something similar, at the same time maybe have a different audiovisual approach, which film might have the same audiovisual approach, but talk about different topics. So yeah, there are a lot of combinations that you can do, which is, I think, a fascinating thing, because you can have probably the three of us together with Maria and Jonathan. We could say the three of us plan a coming of age festival, and the three of us would come up with a completely different festival. That's the beauty of it, because each curator and each programmer comes with their own story and their own findings and their own narratives. So I think, yeah, it's a very complex process. I'm not sure if I'm confusing you, but yeah, that's all I can say.
It's fascinating, and I'm definitely looking forward to hear more from Jonathan and Maria to see your personal practices as curators. What's your process? Because I think it's amazing seeing that, like, Karoline has this perspective as a filmmaker and narrator, and just like brings it with this, narrative in the way she curates. So I would like to hear more from our other two speakers, because I think it's great.
Yes, I think that the curation process is really, it's like mysterious process, because as Karoline says, you have a festival in mind, and then, well, in a big festival, you don't do the curation process yourself. You do it with a team. For example, I have like 4 or 5 people more sharing the films, thinking about the audience that each one has in mind, because I think in festival also we create an audience, and I think that this is a self-revision that I'm doing. What kind of audience are we creating in our minds? Probably we're very similar. For example, the programmers of a festival were very similar, people that love cinema, that probably studied cinema or social science, if it's the case. But it's like a very sophisticated process as well. And I think that this connection with popular audience is also necessary, and we need to work more on that. That's the first self-critique that we have to do ourselves when we're programming festivals. Specialized festivals have this idea of promoting independent films, as I said before, taking up from the invisibility probably, but also we had the responsibility of connecting this film with real audience, not our imagined audience. So that's a very interesting process because films probably attract themselves when you have one film that is about, I don't know, social leaders, for example, and you connect with other film probably from a more popular director. For example, Eric Rocha from Brazil has this film Edna that he just he's coming with the film to Latin America. I think the premiere was in, I think it was in Chile, no, in Uruguay, sorry, in Montevideo. And then it started to go for the other festivals around the world. But of course, Eric Rocha is very popular now. He could help other films that are from the same thematic that you program to gain visibility. So you can relate some less popular films with more popular films and to help to create that conversation, as Carolina said, meaningful conversation and audience for other films that were probably not seen by the audience of the festival. That's one very interesting thing, that you can attract one popular film to other films and to connect them with the fabrication, let's say, of an audience that feel also attracted not only by the big films, but also by the topic. But also in a recent talk, I was talking about curating process and the transformation, because before, I think no one speak about curation in cinema. We talk about more like the television, about programming films, programming films is one kind of thing that we did, like professionals, thinking about the hour, the people that could come, but it becomes more artistic and sophisticated. I don't know the time when it started to being called, at least in Colombia, as curation. But now it has this idea of, first, I think that it has a transformation from a cartographic perspective, that you create from the festival from one region or one country, or one thematic related to this region. And then it has become more like a constellation of that field that attract to each other. So it has been a transformation. I'm not sure if it's my personal case, but it's like the landscape of what does it mean to create now. In my personal case, is I think you feel attracted to a film. It's like a personal connection, like with the people, you like it, but you have to show the film to your team of programmers, and you together have to decide this film is good for the festival and it's good also for the audience.
Thank you.
I would want to agree with something Maria Luna said, in terms of, there's you have to separate, the different kinds of programming or curating now, as Maria Luna said, that word is now in vogue. It's probably going to go out of vogue soon, but while it still is in vogue, we'll use it. Curating, like for festivals, is a different beast to the sort of work that we do at the 1230 Collective. And with festivals, I mean, I'm programming director of a festival, as I said, Third Horizon in Miami, in the US, but I also program for other festivals as part of a team, really. And there is, as Maria Luna said, there's a bit of a part of the process that's sort of almost intuitive, where particularly if you've been doing festival programming for any length of time, you just kind of get a sense of when you see all the films that are available to you, when you sit down to kind of put everything together, there's a kind of an intuition that you're working with there, where you just get a sense of what works well together and not, and so on. And you're just thinking of putting together the best program that you can. And your festival, has an identity, and so you're kind of relying on that to an extent in terms of what audiences, would be interested in, and you kind of have a reputation. With 1230 Collective, it's a bit different. I mean, we're young. We've only been, programming events for like, 2 years now. And, we're not British, and we don't come from Britain, and we find ourselves here, programming, not British films, not mainstream films, and, we're programmers first and foremost, right? We're cinema people first and foremost, and we're not, the 1230 Collective isn't a community group. It's not a social group. We don't have a a community physically that we're part of, you know, and we lead, you know, with the programming. And it's, you know, on that point, it's the same. I you know, would think with anybody who's programming a festival, who's, you know, you lead with the programming. Well, maybe that's not true for a lot of festivals that are identity led. They often don't lead with the films specifically, but we do. I do. You start with the film and you start with thinking, well, what would be an interesting film to show? And you might be thinking also about, you know, seasons and particular events and so on. But you're thinking of the film, and would this be a good, interesting film to show for an audience? And then you kind of work from there. You go, okay, so if we're showing this, if we want to show this, where would be a good venue to show this? Who would be good to partner with? And what audiences will we then want to attract? It's not always going to be the same audiences. It's not always going to be the same venue partners. It's not always going to be the same, you know, partners in general. And you know, and then you kind of work it. So that, you know, and that to me is part of what's, you know, what makes what we do fun and interesting, you know, is, you know, seeing how we can develop a particular audience for an event. And it's not, you know, there's no grand plan in terms of serving a particular community, in terms of, you know, specific representation for a particular demographic. I mean, that all gets into the mix, but, you know, it's not part of any grand sort of like social, let's say, plan that we have. And we're very happy. I mean, if I could say one thing that, you know, I very much am interested in doing is connecting audiences. So, you know, I'd be very happy to have, let's say, you know, English-speaking Caribbean audience, you know, watching a film with a Latin American audience, you know, and you know, the two audiences finding connections there. But I'm not particularly invested in, you know, any one particular audience over another. It's, you know, everybody coming together to kind of, you know, find community through the film, you know, and it's, you know, and that's where it starts. And what happens after that, you know, that's great. But
okay, thanks, Jonathan. I think we're already all going over our time. It was a great conversation. I don't know if there's any last question super quick. Otherwise, I think we should wrap up. And I think it'd be a great roundtable. We got to know more about your work, but also about your practice and what are also maybe some secrets and behind the scenes of curating, not programming films. Thank you again. If there's any question, okay, we have a lot of thank yous popping in the chat. So thank you to all of you for joining us, and thank you to all our speakers. You're being amazing, and I hope to see you for our last Q&A next week, that we are going to wrap up with our online festival. And yeah, thank you again, and thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you very much, Dalila, for the invitation, and all of you for attending and talk to us. Okay.
thank you, Dalila. Thank you, Analia.
Thank
Gracias.
you.